Hello again. Today we're going to be talking about your projects, particularly choosing the objects that you're going to be working with, and thinking about how you're going to work together. So let's go over to this PowerPoint. And so objects and projects. The object can be any object in your environment. Something as ordinary as soap, as we know that's been much on our minds lately. It could be a food or beverage. It could be something that is being presented as related to a particular country, for instance. It could be something that you find stylish. It could be something that you find useful. There really is no limit to what you could choose. Given that you'll be working together, it should probably be something that would be available to all of you, something that you're all familiar with. In other words, we could do a project, perhaps in another class you might, about an object that was really important to you as an individual. In this case, that's not the point. Of course, you can bring a little bit of that in to the project at some point, if it's something that all of you have an element to say something about, or perhaps it's an object that one of you, because of your life experience and your connections to the place where it's made, or the connections to its symbolism, perhaps it's stronger for one of your group members. In that case, it's absolutely fine to work on those things. But overall, we're looking at something that we have some familiarity with. So for instance, it shouldn't be something that is particular to one culture, that means something to a particular religious background and not to the others in the group. That's always very interesting to look at. But here we really want to focus on the global use of very ordinary things in our lives, rather than things that are extraordinary. We're going to get to that in the second part of the class. So, each of your projects will focus on this object, and we want to think about this object as it relates to the processes of globalization we've been exploring. So basically the first part of the class. You won't have a midterm, but this project is a little bit like a midterm. And I think probably one that will get you to think at least as much as a traditional multiple choice or essay question. So we're going to have 15 groups of 6 students. By now we've probably set those up. And you will work with people who are in the same section as you're in, so that you can use some of the section time to work on this, so that Andrea can pick up on what you're doing, make sure that you're moving along, and get your questions answered in a prompt and efficient way. The groups shouldn't be set up during the first section meeting, so that's already been done. And you should plan to work with one another via Zoom or other remote platforms. I assume that by now you already have exchanged emails, you're already ready to proceed, but you may not have gotten very far. You may have chosen your object, but at this point, we have to start thinking about, well, how is this project going to be, carried out? So let's ask questions about this thing. A lot of the information that you're going to be able to do will be through observation and online research. Okay, you don't necessarily, you could say, well, we don't have the library. No, that's true. But even if you were doing this exercise in a more usual setting when you could go to the library, the point is not to get you to do a huge amount of research. You have to do some, but not only library research, but actually thinking about this object in its environment. Okay, so what I really want you to do is think about what we've been talking about in class, go through some of the concepts we've discussed, consider, say, what the connections this object has to the world, consider how it's related to processes, say, of disembedding and abstraction or synchronization, these kinds of ideas, and think about the questions that you want to look at, okay? Because asking questions is, halfway to finding the answer. So you really need to develop some good questions about your object, and go back through the course materials and try to develop some descriptions of your objects, some hypotheses about your objects, and leading to analysis. Okay, so for references, obviously there are a lot of, you can start typing away, getting references. Wikipedia is fine to start, but it's not a place that you want to end up. Okay, you're going to start, you can look at things like company websites. Obviously, if we're looking at certain projects, if you're looking at your iPhone, you may want to look at the Apple site. So things like that can give you good information, but always remember, there are certain aspects that might not be on those. You know, for instance, something like the ecological impact of a computer or a cell phone may not be featured on a company website. Okay, remember that we want to think about sources critically. What is the author's perspective? What are they trying to do themselves with this information? What kind of argument are they trying to make? Are they trying to sell you something? Are they trying to give a good impression of their company? And so how does their interest in the project, in the product, in the object, how does it relate to yours? Now, obviously, if you're looking at a bar of soap, it may be that it doesn't matter so much that it's a particular brand of soap. If you're looking at some other products, I don't know, a fancy purse, for instance, if it's a handbag from Louis Vuitton, name is everything. So different projects, different objects will have different kinds of sources. You may consult sources that you decide not to cite. So reflect on the sources you decide to include. You know, why are they important? What have they added to my knowledge? Usually when I'm doing research, I would say I look at, say, 20 different sources before I can find 2 or 3 that I think are worth engaging in a more important way, or, you know, maybe 2 or 3 that have some good information that I can use in the way that I'm trying to look at the object. So this research, this bibliography can be books or journals. You can, of course, start with the course readings. That's always a good place to start. You should use them in your bibliography according to, you know, how they relate to your work. You should look at academic journals, newspapers, magazines. You can look at statistics. You can think of something like, you know, the WTO statistics, for instance, or other international or national organizations. You can look at films, music, literary essays, works of fiction. There's no limit to what you can look at. There is only a limit to your time, and there's a limit to what each of you can do. So part of this is going to be about how you organize your work with your colleagues, who can do what. And part of it is also just thinking about the object. Sometimes it's easy to get lost in the sources, but sometimes just thinking carefully about, okay, well, what does this object do? How do I use the object? Do I use it differently today than I did 3 weeks ago when I never thought about, you know, using, you know, soap 10 times a day? These kinds of things. So when you do write up your bibliography, use the MLA format. All of your projects should have a bibliography on the final page. Regardless, even if it's a video, you just, you know, you put it on there. We'll get to that in a moment. So again, include your course readings, the additional readings or viewings for your project. Don't neglect to cite anything that you see, even if it's audiovisual. Put in the you know, the links if it's online, and you should have at least 6 and no more than 12 references in addition to the class readings that you cite. Okay, so given that there are 6 of you, it would be good that you share some of the reading, but it's also all right to divvy out certain aspects of the project to certain people, and then you can come together and discuss it. You do want to come to a synthesis in your project and not have it just cut up into little aspects that each person has sort of treated on their own. The more successful projects will synthesize the information, but that doesn't mean that everybody has to read every word or go through every list of statistics. Okay, so be careful about accuracy. It's sometimes, you know, harder to do that with some of the statistics than with looking at, say, a company report where you know what they're trying to sell you. But whatever you're looking at, think about, how did they come up with this information? How did they do the work that they're doing? So some of the aspects you'll look at, you might think about political aspects of this object, which local national narratives make use of this thing. Okay, so I don't know, as American as apple pie. Okay, what are there particular associations? Okay, Bordeaux, French wine, the terroir. What does that mean? What kinds of legislation affect it? Okay, so these are things that might, some things have a lot of legislation that affect them, others not. Sometimes the legislation isn't so obvious. Sometimes the legislation doesn't have to do with the product in its finished form, but with aspects of what go into it, including the work that goes into it. Okay, how do political considerations make use of it? Sorry, it says approved. I can see this particular slide slipped through my revisions, because usually we do something on the UCR campus. Obviously, this time we're not. But so who approves its use? So think about the Food and Drug Administration. Does it have to have a patent? Are there copyrights on it? Who has a legal right to this? Are there any regulations that we use concerning its use? And what about any local political concerns? Does this object have any political implications or meaning in the local setting or in the current political setting of the whole coronavirus pandemic? Culture. So what activities require you to use this thing? Where does it appear? At your home, on campus, in the city? Where is it usually? Where is it not today? For whom is it important? And why does it matter to them? What's its meaning? Are there people or places that are excluded in these stories about this thing? Is it a thing that some people would never use? Is it something that doesn't get to certain people? What roles does the thing play in fantasies of belonging? So does this Louis Vuitton purse make you feel like you're a part of a certain kind of cultural set? What about owning, a particular T-shirt with, a particular band's written on it or something like that? Okay, so how does this thing construct and maintain ideas of belonging? What sorts of ideas, metaphors, movements, ideologies, etc., are associated with it? Okay, so what does it evoke? Okay, you could think about it that way. What does it evoke to each of you? Maybe within your group, it'll evoke different things, and that in itself could be really interesting, just to think about, well, how does it evoke different things to, say, people with different gender identities, or people who were born in different places or in different languages? I'm sure several of you are multilingual. So, what is this thing as it is described in these different contexts? Economically, move up here a little bit. Okay, so how is this thing, how did it get to your environment? Does it differ from the usual use of the thing, the way that you're using it now? Where and by whom did it get there? Who sells it? How are the costs calculated? What forms of labor is it associated with? Who makes this thing? Is it in a big factory? Is it something somebody makes by hand in, say, an art studio? Is it something that is related, say, to this idea of an abstract economy? Is it related to, assembly line production, Fordism, or is it something that is more part of our current gig economy? Okay, so we want to think about some of these differences when we're looking at it. What are the economic statuses and positions of those who are associated with it? So this could be the consumers, but it could also be the people who are distributing it, the unions who are associated with this product and its production. Can it be used up? Is it used up? If so, how is it disposed of or replaced? Where does it go when it's empty? Is the water in the bottle, is it the water or is it the bottle you're buying? Okay, what's going on there? How is it passed on, transferred, or communicated? Okay, so how do you keep it? Is it something that you can keep for a long time? Or does it, like soap, eventually dissolve into the water in the sink? So again, thinking about, these are only some of the questions you might ask, but this is to get you going on some of the ideas. Technological, how is this thing produced? What's it made of? Who maintains it? Where is it maintained? Can you maintain it yourself, or do you need a specialist to maintain this object? And what kinds of technology and machines enable it to be produced and maintained? So there might be a repair person who comes and takes care of your air conditioner or your heater, but what are the technologies and machines that enable that heater to be produced in the first place? Who has access to these machines and technologies? And where has it traveled to and from? The object, where did it go to get to you? How many places did it have to go through? How many ports, how many trains, how many trucks, how many freeways? How many hands have touched that object on the way to getting to you? And what sorts of information and technologies are involved in its production, dissemination, and use? So again, these are huge questions. There are very many questions. You will not be able to answer all of these questions, but these are just some of the things you might start out with, because you want to narrow this down. As you deal with your object, you want to start saying something like, okay, we're going to talk about this particular object. This is what our main idea is. And this is, we will look at the technological, we will look at the cultural, we'll look at the economic, etc. But I don't really want you just to simply say, these are the technological, this is, it's not just about this is, you want to build some kind of an argument. There is, all of a sudden an obsession with soap. Why? We all know. All right, we have to wash our hands. So what is the technology that's changing there? What is the symbolism that's changing there? What are the daily practices that there are ideologies about that are being disseminated now related to science that a few weeks ago we just didn't even think about? Okay, so techniques are not just about machines, they're also about techniques of the body, of themselves, the things that we do to maintain and produce these things. So how do we go about looking at this object? Obviously, we can look at semiological text-based methods. We can use observation and interaction with the object, and we can use, say, historical and statistical information that others have gathered for us, and those are the things that we'll find mainly online. So semiotic or textual analysis, what is that? Semiotic just means meaning, okay, dealing with meaning. When we say textual, we don't just mean books and texts in the sense of printed words. When we say textual, we just mean something that you're going to look at an object and, we can take a pen and we can say, okay, well, what is the meaning of this? If I'm going to take a textual analysis, I'm going to look at its form, I'm going to study its color, I'm going to look at the writing here that's on it. That's what I will be interested in. I won't be saying, okay, well, what is the cost of this? I'm just going to look at its form. I might look at where the object occurs, usually placed on a desk, for instance. It's associated with other things. It's associated with paper. It's associated with writing, etc. And so these textual analysis doesn't have to be about books or articles. It can be about maps, pictures, photographs, and video, but it's when we're really focusing and analyzing the relationships of form, meaning, symbolism within that particular object itself. Okay, so another way to look at it, another method, is to use observation and participation. Okay, how do you use the object? Okay, how do I use this pen? I write. How often do I use it? Where do I use it? What does it feel, smell, taste like? What color is it? Is it heavy? How does it relate? You know, how does this pen compare to this pen? Why is this one different? What kinds of social interactions involve this thing? So this is more, you know, when we're observing and we're participating, this object might require that we interact with other people in order to use it. Does it have a particular cultural expression? Okay, so again, you can use to observe and participate, and to, you know, to note. You can take notes, make sketches, take videos, take photographs, be creative about this object participation. Have fun with this aspect of it, and take notes and see, as you focus on it, how you get to know the object better. History, number, and context. You can look online to find out about the history of this object. How did this object develop? Did it always exist, or is it something that we know when it was started, we know where it came from? When was it first made? What about its ingredients and parts? A lot of times objects don't necessarily, they might seem to be put together or assembled in one place, but in fact they're actually very global in their composition. Is your object available worldwide? To whom? Are there statistical sources that offer timelines, accounts of its production, of its spread and consumption? How many people really have this object? Is it an object like soap, for instance, which has risen in consumption over a certain period of time? Again, when you're looking at statistical sources, you're counting. You're also using quantitative skills when you observe, or when you are doing a semiological analysis. Quantitative and qualitative sources, skills and types of, you know, accounting and qualitative sensing and meaning discovery are very much related in all of these different methods. Okay, one thing you will not be able to do, for instance, a lot of time people think go do research on an object, they think of a big survey research. We don't have the means to do that. If you're interested in that, you could take courses in, in other courses, for instance, in sociology or public policy, where you learn to do big surveys. These are very expensive and time-consuming to do. That's not something we can do in an introductory class. Okay, so in conclusion, let's think about, what is the global, does your object have a global impact or meaning? Does it help to construct a globalizing world? Okay, does the fact that we all use, ballpoint pens, okay, what does that mean? Does that indicate anything about globalization? Does this object have an impact on our ideas of belonging, or in synchronizing our activities with others on a daily basis? How have your ideas about this thing changed since you began to analyze it? Okay, so think about your reflexively. This is what we think about reflexivity. What does it mean that I did this study? How did my idea about this object change as I did this study? This in itself is very important, and you will see that if you start using some of the concepts from class, from the readings, from the other videos you've watched, using those concepts to help you understand, hopefully it will at least a little bit change your idea of the object. That's what learning is all about, right? So we're bringing concepts to bear on a new object. We're really seeing, in this case, we're testing ourselves in our ability to understand the concept and to use it, because that's what we want to be able to do with these concepts. We don't want to just read them in a book. We want to be able to use them, and not only with regard to other readings or an argument for a paper, but in the real world. So how is this object use or meaning changed due to our current pandemic? This is another question that comes to mind, of course, in our current situation. Some objects will not have changed that much. It really depends on what you choose. Others might become more important to you as you are at home. Certain things may come to attention more, other things less so. Some objects you might just not use as much anymore, okay? So I think about my raincoat that I was putting on last quarter to come to the university. Well, I haven't put it on much lately. Have I put on my formal, more formal, like, suits or other kinds of professional outfits? Very late, very, very rarely lately. Occasionally, I'm wearing my yoga pants a lot more these days. So obviously different objects have changed, but some may not have, right? So it just depends. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about your projects. We'll have a chance to talk together as you develop them in class, but have fun with this and enjoy working together. We'll talk about that in a further video. Bye-bye.